Cashing In on Content Marketing. I'm Amanda Milligan, the Marketing Director at Fractal, and every week on this show I interview marketing experts about ways to know the value of your work and get buy-in for your strategies. This week, we're exploring some of the biggest mistakes that are made when creating content and how you can avoid these mistakes. Joining me is the head of marketing at Screaming Frog and the founder of the amazing content curated newsletter, Mark Porter. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey Amanda, what an intro, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on. No, I'm really excited to be here. Looking forward to talking all things content.
Yeah, and I sincerely mean it. If people are listening and they haven't subscribed to Content Curated, you definitely should. It's a really good source of inspiration for coming up with really cool projects that are different from the stuff you see every day. So check that out. And Mark, like having that as something that you take on and your job, your career being focused on content, you've seen so many examples of content projects. And you mentioned to me that one of the things you've seen get botched over and over again is the format of the content that you're seeing. You think this is one of the bigger mistakes. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I guess, format is a good place to start, I guess. So, when I'm talking about content in this context, I'm mostly talking about, larger content pieces that might be for the purpose of digital PR. So content for exposure, brand awareness, and as an SEO, obviously links. And also kind of applies to like larger maybe cornerstone content pieces for a client, such as like a nice long form guide or something where they're trying to get just more traffic. So, like you said, I do see a lot of content, both, with the work we do at Screaming Frog and with the newsletter, where I pretty much just create, all the content pieces that I see online. I guess the format is one, that, everyone has this issue, I think at some point when they're working in content is, what kind of format the piece should actually be in. So, a lot of time is usually spent on the actual ideation of the piece, so coming up with the idea for the campaign, but you should spend a lot of time thinking about the format as well and deciding which format best presents that idea or best presents the, the hook or helps to meet kind of what the objectives of the campaign are. And these days it's easy to think that you have to make like these really big, shiny, interactive, full-page takeover content pieces in order for it to succeed. Otherwise, journalists are just going to be like, "Oh no, what? I can't even filter this table. I'm not interested." But it's not actually the case, really. One of the biggest problems that is easy to fall into is making an interactive for the sake of it. It's quite like I said, it's something that you might think that you have to do, but it's not the case. And usually the best thing to do is kind of ask yourself the questions like, does this interactivity actually add value to the piece? Does it make it easier for the user to play with the data, sort the data or something like that? Or does it better portray the idea? Does it work well across the range of devices? And if the answer to those questions is no, you probably shouldn't make an interactive piece. So I guess that's, one of the things that I see quite a lot is perhaps just a good idea, but perhaps not presented in the best way.
Yeah, and with interactives especially, there's so much cost and time that goes into that to just do it for no particular reason ends up being such a waste of time. And we've had people come to us saying they want it. They'll just say, "Oh, we want to build an interactive," and normally I have to be like, "Well, it depends on the idea. We can build that for you, but we're not going to promise that it's going to get the coverage you want unless it's backed up by a really good idea."
That's right, and a lot of the times when if you're like a digital PR piece or something you're going to be outreaching to the media, a lot of times journalists don't actually care about fancy graphics or well-designed pages, because all they're going to do is they're going to lift the data or lift the story and write their own article about it. And a lot of the time they don't care about the supporting visuals or anything like that. So, I've seen content pieces that do really well that are literally just, quite a simple table, but the idea behind it and the data is so solid that it obviously does well because, it doesn't need that aesthetic to kind of help push it across the line.
Right. It's fundamentally about just making the data clear, right? The findings being something that people can understand.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how else are people making things overly complex? So we're talking about the format. We talk a lot about how you should make it as simple as possible for journalists to understand what you're doing. So what other mistakes are you seeing in that realm?
Yeah, so I guess along the similar vein, it's a big one is complexity as well. It sounds so obvious, but a lot of the time, the generally speaking, simplicity does perform the best. If an idea is really easy to understand and is immediate to someone who's perhaps visiting the page or reading a press release, if they can pick that idea up immediately, it's always going to do much better than a piece that's kind of hard to understand or actually get the angles from. Especially journals these days, they're getting like literally inundated with press releases. If they click on yours or if they go to your page and the idea or the story is not immediately clear, they're not gonna look at it for longer than 5 seconds. They're just gonna move on to the next one. So, simplicity is usually the best route. I guess, for a usual content piece, you usually want to have a few outreach angles. So you might have like a main overarching angle for the piece that is based on your idea or the data that you found. And then you might have like smaller hooks, in that as well, perhaps regional hooks. That's usually a good bet, but it's easy to get carried away with the kind of outreach angles and hooks. And adding more doesn't necessarily give you a more robust campaign or a stronger backup plan. Too many angles can actually kind of dilute a piece and just complicate it unnecessarily.
Because then you're almost giving them too many options, too many choices of what to cover rather than
exactly.
a few. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How can somebody tell, like, what is your litmus test for this? If you created something and you're like, I'm getting the sense that maybe this is a little overly complicated. How do you kind of suss that out?
I mean, when you're involved with an idea, or if it's your idea, or if it's something you've been involved with in the early stages, it's easy to get like overly familiar with it, and it's like, oh yeah, this idea is obvious, like the hooks, the angles are obvious, but you always want to get someone outside of that process to kind of have a look at it, see if they get the idea. It can be someone like in accounting or something, I don't know, like someone that's completely not even involved in that part of the business really, because at the end of the day, the people that are going to be reading this piece is going to be kind of just like everyday people that are perhaps having a little skim of a news site on their lunch break. If they can't get the idea that immediately, then I guess that is a good sign that it perhaps isn't an easy to understand story.
Yeah, I know sometimes people work on these things for like weeks, many weeks, and you're so over looking at it, honestly, when it's by the time it's done, that you're right, you don't really have that objective perspective anymore.
Yeah.
We try also to think about what the headline might be. Do you take that approach? Yeah, because it's like if you don't have that, then you're probably not streamlined enough in the point of what you're creating.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, when you're trying to like vet ideas or work out, perhaps if you've got a big list of ideas that you think might be potential for a campaign, when you're trying to kind of come up with which ones you should pursue, you're right. You should go right back to the end of the process and think, okay, what is the journalist actually going to write about with this piece? What are the headlines going to be? What's the story? And if you can't think of like interesting headlines that a journalist might be able to pick out from a piece, then that's a big red flag, I guess.
Yeah. So if somebody puts all this time in, they feel like, okay, I created something that's very straightforward. I think I picked the right format. It makes sense. It's interesting, and it still doesn't work out. One of the things you said people do is they give up too easily. So what have you seen in that area?
Yeah, I guess, that's something that I've definitely experienced before, in my time working in content. I guess one thing that doesn't help is that, I mean, social media these days, like Twitter, a lot of it is success stories most of the time. It's 90% success stories, people sharing content or campaigns that have done well for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great for inspiration. I literally built a newsletter around just like writing about that stuff. But it can give you a bit of a warped sense of reality in that you think, oh, these people are like smashing it out of the park every time, and my content piece is struggling. So I guess like the main thing to remember is that the best people and the biggest agencies in content, they still have campaigns that flop, and it's totally normal. If you can make a successful campaign every single time, you need to be charging a lot of money because that's pretty amazing. But the most important thing is how you react to a failing campaign. And I guess it's easy sometimes to think, oh, I'm just going to try and like reassure the client and kind of hope they forget about it and move on to the next campaign. But that is really the best approach. A client has obviously spent a lot of money on something like this. They're going to want results. So I guess, not giving up too easy is quite a big one. Usually what you want to do is get together with the team. Again, people that are perhaps outside the idea originally, maybe, different areas of the business, get them involved and see if there's any obvious additional hooks or angles that can be tried out. Perhaps you can just very slightly tweak the piece. Obviously, try different press releases and stuff and see if that can kind of resurrect it, I guess. And I guess a lot of the time, usually persistent pays off, just grinding away at it, trying different sites, trying different industries, outreaching to different people. That can often help get the kind of results that you're looking for, really. And yeah, most importantly, meet the client's expectations.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about more about how you message that to clients, so like, or anybody that you work with, where it's something's not performing the way you thought it would?
Yeah, I guess being honest with them. Don't. I mean, unless it's true, don't say to them, "Oh yeah, we had some really positive responses, but nothing's live yet." That's fine if you have perhaps had a journal that's got back to you and said, "Yeah, I'm going to cover this eventually." But just being honest with them that yeah, it's not currently performing at the moment. We've outreached it to 400 people, and no one's covered it.
Mm-hmm,
And as long as you back that up with, here's what we're going to do next. We're going to tweak this. We're going to try this different press release. We're going to outreach to these different industries. As long as you're honest with them, and then you back it up with what you're going to do next, then I think that's absolutely fine.
yeah, yeah. And I tend to tell people, especially with digital PR, it's really hard to think that even if you write the best pitch for the best piece of content, you're still not going to have 100% chance of success, because there's always this percentage of chance and luck where
Yeah.
what does their editorial calendar look like? Maybe they just literally can't write about anything, or they just publish something relevant to what you are sending them, right? Like, you're not always
Yeah.
going to know.
Yeah, that's right. I think one thing that's quite handy too, like say you got a content piece and it's done okay, like maybe it's got a couple of pieces of coverage, but not enough to kind of meet those expectations. One thing you need to do is to make sure you're actually reading the coverage that a piece gets. Don't just quickly like copy and paste it, put it in a spreadsheet, send it to the client and say, yeah, we're awesome. Actually read the content piece, see what angles and stories the journal that's covered it has shown interest in, because it might not necessarily be the main angle that you're kind of outreaching. That can really help highlight areas that you could potentially pivot to, definitely.
That's a great point. Yeah, actually taking a look at what's working and see how you can extrapolate on that.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about the actual topics. We've talked a lot about more of the process. When it comes back to the ideas, and I've seen this debate happening a lot on Twitter, and we at Fractal talk about this a lot, but the relevancy of the content that you're creating. So how on brand or not on brand it should be. There's a lot of disagreement here. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, relevancy is incredibly important. Like you do need some relevancy when you're doing this kind of stuff. Whether you're doing, digital PR or traditional link building, relevancy is key. Relevant links are going to be more important than high quality links ultimately. But I think there is a bit of a misconception around this, that you shouldn't do irrelevant pieces. Google says, oh, relevancy is key. But I think, yeah, it is important, but it also depends on what the objectives of the campaign are. Does your client need more brand awareness in general? Perhaps they want coverage on like a generic news site, a national news site. And if that's the case, then I think running, a tenuously linked campaign, perhaps a bit of a fun campaign, is fine. But if the client needs, like, they really want some targeted links, really relevant links that are actually going to drive kind of targeted traffic with the potential to generate sales and leads, then obviously you're going to want to be doing much more on-brand content that are in line with their target audience. So, I think irrelevant pieces are fine. In reality, for a proper, sustainable and long-term campaign, you should be mixing both these approaches anyway. You should be going after really relevant on-brand links or coverage or stories. And then it's fine to do kind of more generic, more tenuously linked content pieces as well that are off-brand, because those are the types of pieces that have broad media appeal. That's definitely, I think it's a tricky one, but you need to be doing both those things anyway, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what's hard. I think some people make the assumption that when you say just like irrelevant or something that it's completely a different industry, it doesn't make sense for you to create. And there's so much in between that than being on brand and being completely irrelevant. There's just a million ideas that live in that middle ground. Our language around it is tangential, right? We say, oh, we're going to create tangential content. I completely agree with you. If your goal is either general awareness or link building, um, but yeah, I mean, some people have amazing internal data that would work really well for a branded project, but after a
Yeah.
while, it starts feeling like advertising if that's all you're doing, and it's like really brand related if that's all you're
Yeah.
willing to
I
do.
mean, having a client with internal data is always amazing because yeah, it's data that no one else has, and you can usually spin it various ways. But a lot of the times you do eventually struggle to work out how to repurpose that data if it's kind of like the same kind of thing all the time. And yeah, I guess yeah, you're right. With internal data, sometimes it can come across as a bit self-promotional to journalists and stuff like that. But
Yeah, as long
um,
as it's like valuable, it still has to have all the same things that tangential content has. It has to
yeah,
be useful and widely appealing and all that sort of stuff.
exactly.
Do you have an example of something that might throw somebody off who's used to only doing branded content that's a little more tangential, but that worked quite well in your opinion?
Um,
I know I'm putting you on the
yes,
spot.
it's a tricky one. I mean, there was some like talk recently about a content piece that was like I think it was like a credit card company or something like that did a piece on like dog breeds or something, or like the most popular dog. I can't remember now.
Hmm.
No, sorry, it's like the most popular condiments. I don't know why I was talking about dogs then, but it's the most popular condiments or something. And I definitely see the argument there. Why is a credit card company doing a piece on condiments? I don't know really, but maybe because people use credit cards to buy their groceries. But I don't know. You can always tenuously link something, but I guess as long as it still performs, as it gets good coverage in national news sites, I think that's fine. Ideally, you do want some kind of relevancy there, just in case a journal is like, yeah, this is cool, but why are you doing it? You always want to have that up your sleeve to an extent. So yeah, I mean, it's quite a common thing because especially in boring industries, it's easy to just come up with what might be a good idea without even thinking about relevancy. So you do see a lot. Sometimes journalists might be a bit, okay, why are you actually writing about this? But I think most of the time, especially for kind of broad media, they don't really care that much, really. They just like a good story.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that though, not just thinking about what Google wants, but actually what publishers want. As
Yeah,
you don't want to skip that step when it comes to creating content that you're trying to build links and awareness for, because that's the person you're reaching out to. Like, it matters.
definitely.
So what about somebody who does one of these awesome projects and then they never do another project again? Do you see that a
Yeah.
lot?
Well, I guess like, one thing with content pieces is it's easy to treat them as kind of one-off campaign. Okay, let's say you put together a campaign, it's done really well, client's really happy, they want to do another piece, and you kind of just move on to the next piece. But actually, you can usually squeeze quite a lot of value out of the campaign. Perhaps you can update it if there's something topical that's come up around it. You can quickly refresh the data and outreach to journalists that are talking about a topic, being like, hey, actually, we've got this awesome content piece about this. That can kind of give it a new lease of life. So I think it's important to be reactive on that front, definitely. And especially if it's perhaps an annual piece, perhaps you're looking at, the best X in 2021 or something like that. If you kind of update those every year, or, if you have an idea like that does well, that you can then update it every year. So next year you can refresh the data, maybe put a little spin on it. You can even analyze kind of the year-on-year changes. And then you can just get in touch with all the same journalists, all the same publications that covered it originally, and kind of sweep up again, I guess. So yeah, it's important to kind of keep campaigns not in the forefront of your mind, but whenever you see an opportunity to be reactive, it's often worth revisiting a piece and trying to freshen up a bit and jumping on some topical subjects.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the logistics of this? So if somebody's creating a ton of content and they're not sure how to really keep tabs on what might need updating, do you like upfront have a list of things that are just tagged well so you can always go back and be like, oh, Valentine's Day is coming up. Maybe we should talk about XYZ, or how
Yeah,
do you organize this?
I don't know. You know what? I don't think that we have anything formal in place for that. I think that's part of the skill set that you need working in this industry. You need to be aware of what's topical. You need to be aware of what's happening in the world, and kind of have the ability to tie that back to your client or some previous work you've done. I think that's yeah. I'm sure there's ways to like really properly categorize that stuff. So like you said, you can kind of click on something and look at everything that's related to something that's a pretty common topical event, like you said, like Valentine's Day or something, and it would just surface it all. But yeah, I think that's part of working in digital PR and content is
Yeah.
just being able to just know when something's topical and when people are actually going to be receptive to it.
Yeah, do you just keep an eye on general news? Do you have certain tools you check on? I know there's so many trend tools out right now. Is there anything in particular you like using?
Not really. I mean, I just check, normal news websites or Twitter. Just kind of, yeah, just obviously with Twitter, a lot of times you kind of just like immerse yourself within an industry. For example, my Twitter timeline was pretty much mostly like SEO, content, digital PR. So, it is a bit of an echo chamber, I guess. But, just keeping it on just everyday news and or seeing, what's working well for people. If you follow lots of people within an industry, usually, like digital PR, you get a sense for what's working well for people that can help spark ideas. So yeah, being aware of what's topical, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point though about having to set your social account up to see that type of stuff. Like, it might not always find you unless you're following relevant people.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, like, Twitter is pretty good actually. It's these days it does kind of surface like big topics that are happening in the world, I guess, outside of your followers and stuff. So that I am a big user of Twitter. I don't tweet as much as I used to, but I do use it quite regularly just to see what people are up to, what's working well for people, what's actually going on in the world, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter. I feel like I'm on it way too much. So we're nearing the end, but I wanted to touch on something you mentioned, which was technical issues. And I think this is probably very often overlooked and can hinder the success of a campaign. So what have you seen people doing wrong?
Yeah, so this is just like going right back to the basics, really. So this is usually referring to when you made like a nice shiny content piece on a client's website. We know it can be kind of a logistical nightmare to actually get that live on a client's website sometimes. But there's loads of basic checks that you should be doing. And, one thing we do at Screaming Frog is we have like some of the developers or people outside the project that are technically minded to check a content piece for really basic things like Google Analytics tracking. Is the metadata all properly fleshed out? Have we removed the no index tag or something like that? So it's not actually going to be blocked to Google and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of basic technical issues that you want to check. It's like I said, basic stuff. Even stuff like Open Graph or Twitter cards is really important too. So if people are actually sharing your content piece, you want it to populate a nice featured image and pre-populate the title and the description and stuff. There's a lot of things that people often overlook. Even things like fab icons. You see people like put together these massive content pieces on a client's website, and then you check it out and it's got like no fab icon. It just looks weird. And yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that people overlook that's really important to kind of just like a run through as a checklist, but just like final check before you send it over to the client, basically. Because there's nothing worse than finally getting a client to upload a piece onto their website and then having to get in touch with them and be like, hey, we forgot to actually like add tracking to this. Can you upload this version? It's just embarrassing.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a checklist, but I think this episode serves as a really great checklist for anybody creating this type of content. Like, literally just don't give up too easily. See how else you could repurpose it. Don't make it too complex. See where the relevancy matches up with the objectives. All of this stuff, I think, is a really good framework for making sure that what you're creating is going to be on point. And the thing you're just mentioning kind of ties back to the image part that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, because I think that the important thing is to make it look professional and authoritative.
Yeah.
Right, without overcomplicating it. And those things like the favicon thing, like, definitely not everybody thinks about that, but you're right. If it looks like very put together, if it looks very thoughtfully created, I think that can go a long way, and at least building trust with a writer, right?
Definitely. I mean, there's loads of other stuff really to look at on that front as well. Like even stuff around sources. You need to make sure they're formatted well. You won't believe how many times that you see a content piece and the sources are just like bunged at the bottom in like a different font, and it just looks awful. It's like you need to make your sources easy to find because they add credibility. And if you're hiding your data, your sources, your methodology, it just seems a bit sketchy to a journalist. You want to make sure that they're easy to find and they can check stuff out if they want to, if they can look at the raw data, then even better. So yeah, that's another big one as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So Mark, knowing the objective of the show, who would you recommend to be guests on future episodes to talk about creating great content and getting buy-in for it?
That's a tricky one. Yeah, I mean, there's so many people with the digital PR scene or content scene in the UK is great. There's so many people that you can follow to kind of get inspiration, work out what's working well, even get involved in debates with. But I guess one person that I'd recommend to follow is Giselle Navarro from Neomam,
Yeah,
because
she's awesome.
yeah, they're always putting out great content. I don't mean to, but I always accidentally feature them like 3 or 4 times in the newsletter sometimes, and I just like, wow, you guys put out a lot of content, but they're just doing everything right on that front, and they have been for a long time. So yeah, I definitely vote for Giselle.
Cool. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some of the things you've seen in content and how you can improve it. I appreciate it.
No worries, it's great to be here.
If you've listened to this and want even more tips, sign up for our podcast newsletter by going to the podcast page on the Fractal website. And if you've learned anything from this show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and leave a review. Finally, if you have feedback, suggestions, ideas, tips on how I can get myself to work out in the morning, or anything you'd like to share with me, shoot me an email at amanda@frac.tl. I'm a shameless extrovert who would love to hear from you. Thank you to Sean Kelly for podcast music and editing, and to Joao Pereira for logo design. And thank you, dear listener. I hope you'll join us next time.